Erythropoietic Protoporphyria, or EPP.
Even though it was diagnosed, there was no treatment.
Her personal threshold for sun exposure, just 9 minutes before the pain becomes unbearable.
It usually affects my hands, my feet, and my face, the appendages. Every doctor I went to said I was either crazy or that I had mental issues.
How was that journey for you in dealing with that isolation of having EPP?
There are dark days, and I've had dark days.
What did life look like for you? Were you just hiding inside with the shades? Or?
Yes. The only relief for me is to put a cold compress on the areas that are impacted to try and reduce the swelling.
Welcome to Rarely Discussed, an American Porphyria Foundation podcast with your hosts, Andrew McManaman
and Nicole Castellano.
We have porphyria, a rare disease. Rare diseases differ greatly but share many similarities in how they affect our lives.
Being rare can feel lonely and isolating, but we're stronger together. Join us in meaningful interviews with porphyria and rare disease experts and the patients and families impacted as we connect, learn, and heal together.
We'll talk diagnosis, treatment, pain, mental health, managing daily life, and everything rare. Today's guest has turned one of life's most painful challenges into a mission of hope, I'd say, connection and change. Michelle Capon lives with Erythropoietic Protoporphyria, or EPP, a rare and brutally painful form of porphyria that makes exposure to sunlight feel like being burned alive. Her personal threshold for sun exposure, just 9 minutes before the pain becomes unbearable. And while EPP affects every patient differently, Michelle knows firsthand the physical pain, the emotional isolation, and the long-term trauma this condition can bring. At one point, it brought her so low that she didn't even know if she could keep going, but she did. And now she's the president of the Canadian Association for Porphyria, where she's building something bigger than herself, connecting patients and healthcare providers across the country, advocating for treatment access, and working to make sure no one else has to suffer in the dark alone. Michelle is here today to share her incredible story of pain, resilience, and the community she's helping build one step and one hurdle at a time. Welcome to the podcast, Michelle. I appreciate you.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Good. It's a beautiful sunny day.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of sun, obviously EPP is pretty surrounded, evolves around the sun, but I wanted to ask you, just because we've typically just had a lot of acute patients on this podcast, and I wanted to see how that experience started from you and just rewind to where it all started.
My experience as an EPP patient, it started with my parents taking me on vacation a lot to warm places and me screaming a lot in pain. I remember being a child and my parents took me to Greece, and it still sticks in my mind as the worst experience I've ever had. They took me to Corfu. It was beautiful, beautiful beaches, beautiful water, and all I could do was scream. I think I was about 7 at the time, 7 or 8 maybe, and I spent the majority of my vacation inside our villa. My parents were beside themselves. They didn't actually know what to do. I wasn't actually diagnosed until about 12 years old. And by that point, I felt like a human pincushion. Every doctor I went to said I was either crazy or that I had mental issues, or they just wanted to test me incessantly. I remember every week going into my local doctor and having either a stool sample or a urine test or umpteen numerous blood draws for this, that, and the other. It was pretty painful. It was so much so that when I was diagnosed, I was finally like, yes, the testing can stop now and I can move on and just get medication or something to make me feel better. So that's how it started.
So with that in mind, I know a lot of people say this, is they have this terrible journey of getting diagnosed. And then once they get an answer to it, they have that brief feeling of, well, I'm content. I know exactly what this is. This is perfect. But then they don't realize all the hardship that follows even that. And I wanted to say, like, after you were diagnosed with EPP, how How was that looking for you?
It was interesting. I was a really sporty person growing up and always outside, always doing either softball or volleyball, basketball, badminton. And so it was really tough. I remember moving back from the UK, which is known for its rain and not very sunny days. And it was amazing. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have that many reactions to quite a sunny Canada during the summer. And I had a terrible outbreak where I had lesions all over my arms. And I was still insistent to my parents that I went out and played my softball with my team of girls. And so we literally wrapped my arms in tensor bandages. I look like a human mummy on the outfield. And my coach is like, "Are you sure she can play?" And my parents are like, "She's not going to not play." But I literally had open wounds everywhere on my arms. It was awful. I remember seeing a softball picture that one of my girlfriends gave me a few years ago, and everyone's in these short shirts and t-shirts, and I'm in a turtleneck, a black turtleneck with a shirt over top of it and long pants. Kind of made me laugh. Talking about treatment journey, I think what's frustrating for me is that even though it was diagnosed, there was no treatment. I went through, first they tried me on large doses of beta carotene, which made me look orange. So I remember being stopped in the hallway and at school, and one of my teachers was like, "Are you okay?" And I would say, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why?" Like, you look orange. I was like, "Oh, that's just my medication. Don't worry about it." And honestly, they phoned my parents and they were like, "Is your daughter okay? She's not looking well." And they said, "Oh no, it is her medication because high doses of beta carotene turn your skin orange." And I think if I think about that now in comparison to the treatments that are out there, they were trying to build the melanin in your skin so it emulated color, which light bounces off of. Let's see, what else did I try in terms of treatment? Light therapy. I used to go stand in like a little sun box for 10 seconds, and then it would go 12 seconds and then 15 seconds. I think I made it up to a minute 40 in the height of my light therapy treatment. I would go twice a week, stand in this little box with my little goggles. Like I felt like I was going to a sun tanning booth, and it didn't work. I then moved back to the UK and did my master's over there. And I worked with the Welsh Porphyria Association, and they had a sunscreen called the Dundee sunscreen. And I remember going to them and they said you can have it in pink, beige, or brown for different skin tones. And I was like, I think I should choose pink just because I'm so pale and pasty, but I'm gonna go with the beige. And that was the first relief I had. I mean, all these different treatments, all this long drawn out journey, that was the only thing that gave me any immediate relief. And I believe it's a zinc based type sunscreen that has a protector. Like none of these like sun creams worked. None of them. The UV clothing didn't work for me. I've tried all that. And then I moved back to Canada and couldn't get the darn sunscreen back in Canada because it was by prescription only. And they were only allowed to distribute it in Europe. So back to having no treatment, no access, nothing that actually worked. I actually gave up for a while and I said, I don't want to see any more doctors about this. I don't want to see a specialist about it. I want a treatment. Don't touch me unless you're going to give me a treatment. I even tried, like when I got back, I even tried going to a doctor and saying, this is what I have, this is what I want, and here's the forms you're going to fill out. And he was like, I know nothing about your condition. I was like, I know, but it doesn't matter. Just help me get this. And he's like, okay, you crazy lady, like, sure. And like, he's like, how about you let me do some research first and then we'll come back. And I was like, okay, whatever you need, but just sign, please. So it's been a journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that time frame, when you moved back and you didn't have treatment again, the clothing didn't work, you couldn't really get the sunblock because of the prescription. I mean, what did life look like for you? Were you just hiding inside with the shades, or what was it for you?
Yes. I mean, yes. I would do my best. I mean, after that, I had two children. It was really hard for me to sit inside and not be outside interacting with them. But they very quickly learned that the sun hurts mommy. Um, I found, yeah, like I would go out for a period of time and then I would say, oh, got to spend like 2 or 3 days out of the sun because I had a reaction. I would literally cover up everything, walk around in long sleeves. I'd try and find clothing that was really light, but because I got so hot all the time trying to cover up that it was really, really light, but I could cover up. The problem is, unless I look like a total freak walking down the street with gloves on, like Michael Jackson gloves, because that's my most painful area is my hands. I wanted to feel normal when I was out. So I would often have really long baggy shirts that I would pull down over my hands as opposed to wearing gloves. I'd wear like a hat. Often wear long pants like jeans. My legs weren't necessarily the issue, but my feet, oh, can't wear sandals. I was like, no, I'll wear run. So I'm attuned to wearing running shoes everywhere I go, no matter how hot it is.
Ugh. So I, so I mean, with that being said, too, is when I said about the 9 minutes, and I know I read that in your story that you posted or got posted about your 9 minutes, and did you just trial and error that? Did you just go outside and figure it out, or how did you come to that conclusion?
No, so one of the clinical trials that I have been on, the first ever one that I'd ever been on, the first thing we had to do was go baseline our reaction. It sounds like the most barbaric thing in the world to go and basically make yourself have a reaction. So I had gone down to the US. I had sat in probably one of the hottest states out there. I was terrified. And in all fairness to the clinical trial, they said, don't make yourself have a reaction. But I'm not sure how you stop yourself from having a reaction when they say go and baseline as soon as you feel something. But for me, as soon as you feel something, that's already the start of a reaction. And so literally, I came back in from that first experience and I said, okay, I'm done. And they said, oh, that's 9 minutes. I said, and then I proceeded to have a reaction for the next 2 days. So that's the only reason I know that it's 9 minutes.
Gotcha. And when you're out there for 9 minutes, or in other situations when you're outside too long, what does that look like for you?
So it starts for me with a tingling. It usually affects my hands, my feet, and my face, the appendages. It then feels like someone's basically lit a match and is burning your skin alive. For me, it results in severe swelling. The reactions usually last 2 to 3 days. It often, and I don't ever let it get this bad anymore, but it has led to lesions where I have dramatic scarring on my arm. I used to have holes in my arm from the scabbing and the scarring. You have sort of hardened skin across your knuckles and sometimes your nose. And then it results in the only relief for me is to put a cold compress on the areas that are impacted to try and reduce the swelling. And then your hands become incredibly fragile. So for me, it's always my hands, but I couldn't even bend my fingers because the swelling was so bad sometimes. I would try and do up like my jeans or a button and the dexterity is gone and it's extremely painful. I don't know if you've ever seen, I think, the movie called Glass. It's a Marvel superhero where he shatters. That's how it
Yeah.
feels. So if you accidentally bumped your finger, it would feel like your hands are breaking off. Like, it's so painful. And as I mentioned, that reaction would last for about 2 to 3 days, depending on the severity and how much exposure you get post the original attack as well. And for me, it seems to, like, it's weird. Sometimes it'll affect my face, where my face starts to swell. Sometimes it's my hands. Sometimes it's the back of my ankles. Like it seems to do whatever it wants. And when I think it's fine outside, that's when I have the worst reactions. Like for me, because I live in Canada, in Ontario, our winter, the sun is further away. So it can still be bright and cold and you can go outside. But for me, the worst time of the year is springtime. It's like you've been in isolation because of the winter. It's like being a groundhog. You come out and it's like, oh, the sun. And you kind of run away and retreat back into your hole because that's the most painful time for you, or for me anyway. Driving to work is a nightmare. I have special tinting on my car, which I'm allowed legally because I have this blood disorder. I have special armbands, so if I go swimming, I wear these armbands from like here. They show the tips of my fingers and they go all the way up to here. People look at me like I'm like an alien, I swear, when I'm on a beach. Not that I go on a beach very often, but that's honestly how I sort of cope and how my reactions are.
And to touch on the coping aspect, I mean, I'm sure there's still hard days, I'm sure. And I just wanted to ask, I mean, obviously you step out and you're covered head to toe and people are looking, and maybe when you were younger it was a lot harder, but how was that journey for you in dealing with that isolation of having EPP?
It's been really tough. Not gonna lie, there's good days and bad days. It's so funny when treatment started to become available, my friends were like, "Oh, is that for your son thing?" Like my friends that I grew up with since I've been 10 all knew I had this. They called it a sun allergy or like the vampire disease. But they were like, "Oh, this is great. Like, awesome. Good for you." But what they don't see is the battle behind closed doors. And, all my friends go on these amazing all-inclusive resort type hotel, like vacations down to the Caribbean. I can't think of anything worse. That's like my worst nightmare. I go out for one day and I sit in a room by myself for 3 days. And I go out for one day and it's like repeat, wash, rinse, repeat. And it's awful. So people are like, "You're always on the go." And I'm like, yeah, because I can't sit outside. Like that's the worst thing for me. I want to be in warm weather because I love it. I get such a high from being in the sun, because with EPP patients, you don't get the vitamin D that you need. So a lot of us struggle with serotonin imbalances, clinical and deep depression. Some of us don't work. Some of us have it worse than others. The first person I ever met who had EPP, I was about 35. She couldn't even sit next to a window. At least I can do that. Like, at least I can actually have light around me. So, I mean, I think there's varying degrees of how you survive. And I think I do things very independent. I'm a very independent person now. I don't need people around me. But yeah, I mean, obviously, there are dark days, and I've had dark days for sure.
And it's an interesting thing to hear it that way, because I mean, we have our own support systems in a sense, but then you're talking about being more of like a solo person, more of an independent person. So would you say that's something that came from having EPP? I'm sure it's probably changed it a little bit, but have you always been kind of an independent person?
Totally. I think with my family upbringing the way it was, I have 2 brothers and I was the only girl. So I was I never really felt like that I had someone in my family that I could relate to, because I was a girl and I was very tomboyish. But I think just the way I got brought up and my parents' situation and them separating, I think that contributed to me being very independent. But absolutely, I think having EPP and, knowing my limits was a huge thing for me. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go out and put myself through pain. I'm just not going to do it. And I remember one time my mother-in-law at the time, she was like, come down to the beach. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, that means pain for me. She's like, come on. And I'm like, what don't you understand? No means no. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a fairly strong-willed individual anyway. I don't think EPP has changed that in any way. I don't think. I mean, it could have.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know what I can cope with. I know what I want to cope with. And I would say that EPP has definitely helped me realize limitations.
And in that sense, I know you were talking about how you're always somebody that stays on the move. Obviously, EPP is a huge part of that, staying on the move. But is that something that you would say is a big coping mechanism for you, just to deal with it, is to keep your mind busy by getting busy with other things?
Totally. For me, because I struggle so badly with depression, I found that being sporty helped my mind and my mental health regimen. So for me, being active, going to the gym, being involved in sports teams, being around other people, and especially, it's really interesting, sports at night. So I started playing Frisbee, Ultimate Frisbee, about 9 years ago. And because it's played at night, the sun's not as intense. So I can go and play with my friends and not really be impacted or wear my arm guards and still feel like I have a social life. Like on weekends, when I used to play volleyball, I didn't ever want to go into volleyball tournaments because they were always on a weekend and they were always on a beach and it was always hot and warm. I would literally hope for a rainy day so that I didn't break out. And I now carry like a full tent around with me everywhere I go.
And what does that tent look like?
It's like one of those beer tents that you put up and it's got 4 posts and you can get walls. And I literally take it everywhere I go. If I'm doing an activity, I take it. If I'm going camping, I take it. If I'm going to my kids' like sports games, I take it. And like I grab random people to help me put it up and then random people to help put it down. So yeah, I take it. It's like the best $200 I've ever spent in my life.
It's those things that you don't really think about. And I know we had a podcast with a similar issue with obviously the sun porphyrias, where it's the driving aspect that nobody thinks about, but then carrying around a tent. What other things would you say that you deal with on a daily basis that a lot of people don't think about? I mean, are you supplementing heavily on vitamin D? What does that routine look like for you?
So
Is that a thing?
I was told at a fairly young age that you shouldn't be taking supplements for EPP because it's hard on the liver. And part of having EPP is you have to go for liver sort of wellness checks every year, or you're supposed to anyway. And so I've never really done a lot of intervention. I've never really taken vitamins. I try and find the most natural way. I'm not one of those hippy dippies either, where you have to take all sorts of like natural stuff. Mine is really like try and do the things that make you feel better. The one thing I think that most people don't think about, and it's funny, I had a conversation with someone about it today, office lights. When I go into the office, there are particular lights that agitate my skin in the office. So when GSK was building a new office, I was on the office committee. And I have to ask for special non-UV lights to be used. And they're like, why? And I was like, because I have a disability, I can't be here. Ooh, wait, I can't be here. So go ahead and put UV lights in. If you want me to come into the office, then don't. And they're like, okay, we'll put non-UV lights in. But you think about that. like classrooms, a child growing up in a classroom that has fluorescence or like office lights throughout the school. There was one workplace that I worked in, and there was a room, I just couldn't go in it. The lights actually burned to my skin. And I was like, I can't go in there, can't use that room. Try being an executive and having a hate on for one room. You're like, no, sorry, that one's available. I can't use that one. The other thing that people don't think about is any surgeries that you go through. If they use laparoscopic lights, it actually causes swelling in your internal organs because they are also light sensitive. So if you're doing like a trach or like any sort of colonoscopy or a scope, anything they use with lights can cause a disturbance. And not very many people know that. It's not something they think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's just those normal everyday things. Everybody gets a colonoscopy. You don't think about the lights. You don't think about any of that
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, thank God I haven't had to have a colonoscopy, but he's coming up soon, I'm sure. And I'm not looking forward to that. Lights and all.
I mean, yeah. I mean, as long as you mention about the lights, I guess. But
well, what are they going to do? They're going to have to get special equipment or not use a light. Then how do you get a proper colonoscopy?
right.
I don't know the answers to that. And the problem is, neither does the gastroenterologist, because they've never met a patient with EPP and they have no idea how to handle it.
Right. Yeah, a lot of questions that need answers. That's for sure. I wanted to switch gears a little bit because it's something that I relate to a little bit too with this podcast. But how did you jump from being just kind of like this patient dealing with your own thing to switching to advocacy and becoming the president of the Canadian Association of Porphyria? Because I mean, for me, when I was diagnosed with porphyria, I was like, I kind of don't really want to think about having porphyria. I just want to continue on with my days and just be like, it's an issue when it's an issue, not immerse myself in doing something that has to relate with porphyria all the time. But it just got to a point where it's like, I feel like I'm doing a disservice, and I feel like creating awareness is extremely important with something this rare. But what was your thought process with kind of switching into a role like that too, nonetheless?
I think it's similar. I'm not going to lie. So, I mean, I moved into healthcare as a career when I was about 24, 25. And I just loved the people that I worked with in the UK, in the NHS. And they were so amazing and caring. And my background, I mean, my degree's in cultural anthropology and human geography, so not related at all. And I thought, I got a job in healthcare and I was like, this is my space. I found it. I'm no longer going to do international development. I'm not going to live in Africa. I don't do well with bugs. Let's do healthcare. And so I started in healthcare as a professional career. And I've grown my career from a professional standpoint from that perspective. But selfishly, when I moved back from the UK and I started living in Canada again and tried to find out if there were any new treatments, and there weren't, I found this little organization, Canadian Association for Porphyria, and I thought, maybe I'll just sit on the board. And I sat on the board for probably 4 or 5 years. And I didn't have an executive role. I didn't do a lot because we're a very small organization run mostly by volunteers. And at the time it was all volunteers. And it came to a time where our former president was thinking about retiring. And we probably only had about 6 board members at the time, maybe 7. All of the people had been there a long time. Most of them were based in Alberta. I'm based in Ontario. And I thought and I asked myself this question, do I care enough to let this organization close or hobble along? Because that's what I felt it was kind of doing at the time. There was a lot of focus on acute porphyrias, but not a lot on the subcutaneous porphyrias. And that's because there wasn't any treatment. We had panhematin, we had Givlari, on the market for acute porphyria patients, but all the different molecules for EPP just weren't in Canada, and there was no sign of them ever coming to Canada. And selfishly, I really wanted treatment, and I wanted treatment for other Canadians. And so I made the decision to initially join the board as vice president when our former president, Kim, stepped into the role. And then when she stepped down, I had to make the difficult decision. Do I step in or do I step out? And I decided that it was worth it to step in and support an organization that's near to my heart. And I have to say, I love that I'm able to wear a professional healthcare hat, a patient advocacy hat, and a patient hat, because I think there isn't much someone who's an HCP or another healthcare professional can tell me about my journey or my patient's journey that I don't already know. And
Right.
will I be here forever? I don't know. Will I continue to be the president? I've just been elected for a second or third year. I think it's a third year. So at least I'm here for another year, and I'm enjoying what I'm doing. So
what is that? Just to give people some insight behind the scenes, because I feel like it's downplayed a lot, and I think when we were in Pamplona, I feel like I talked to enough people with the associations to be like, no, I feel like people don't realize what people go through to make this stuff work. And I'm just curious on what your day-to-day operations just look like in terms of trying to get the word out and the struggles of an association with a rare disease like this.
So I'm fairly lucky. I mean, I call GSK my day job and I call Porphyria my night job. And so I'm constantly trying to balance both, as well as being a single mom to two boys. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge, or it's not a challenge, it's actually a blessing. I now have an amazing board. Kelly's one of those individuals. Lindsay and Nicole are another. Derry's another. Jeannie's another. They're all here for the cause. They either have porphyria or they have a family member with porphyria. And again, there are like those lifetime people like Jeannie and Derry who've been with the organization for 14 years. God bless them. And then there's the newer people that have joined and are kind of riding on the merits of like the earlier organization being set up and going through the pain points of being a new organization. We're still extremely small compared to some of the other organizations that are out there, especially in the US. But my goal is to learn from one another. I love Paploma because we were able to network with each other and learn from each other. And that's the biggest learning I came away from that with, is you're not alone. When I first took over, we had a fairly outdated website, and I really pushed for that uptake in social media. Kelly's been fantastic at managing our Light Up campaign annually, and I think it's probably a global best practice, if I can say that, because it's definitely increased our social media presence like 1,000-fold. We now think simple things like we now have a telephone number, which we never had before. And you'll speak to a human being, or if you don't, you can leave a message. Things like we now have emergency cards that we can send out to patients that give them information so that when they go into an emergency center or a healthcare center, or they're crossing the border for treatment, they can just flash it and say, hey, I'm not lying. This is what I have. Things like we have a volunteer, we have a coordinator now who's amazing, and, paying her, she's our only paid position, and, paying her electronically instead of having to wait for a check to come be written physically, mailed to, from Alberta to Ontario, which can take 5 days, to then mail back, to then mail back again. Like simple things like that people don't really understand that a small charitable organization needs to go through. from a regulatory perspective. These are all things that we've had to, sounds so silly, but all these little things that we've had to overcome and continue to grow. We did an amazing fireside chat on Saturday where we had people from India and South Africa on. There was only, 16 of us on, maybe less? No, I think it was 9. But it was great. We still had sharing of stories from like 3 or 4 different countries. It was quite emotional as well, which was nice.
And would you say that there's a lot of, I know we talked about Pamplona, but would you say that there's a lot of takeaway for you being in that role to just better the association in that sense, the collaboration with the other countries and their experiences?
I recently attended a conference in Prague called Global Skin, which is another board that I sit on. And there was this amazing presentation that we had on the Friday afternoon by a young lady in South Africa. And I learned so much from her one session. I was like, oh man, do I ever have a lot of work to do with CAP? But I walked away and I was like, can I have those slides? And could you send me those presentations? And can you just send me your policies? And can I have you come and speak to my board and tell them, what they need to do? It was just amazing. And I realized that even though we've come so far, we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, it's a journey, and I think it was good to share some of those, what we think is little things, like from what you're having to do, like getting a phone number, getting a real person, getting a coordinator. It seems so little, but it frees up the time to where you can actually advocate and things like that. But I wanted to ask too, based on what you can actually share. I don't know if things are secretive or whatever, but what's something that you're working on as an association that's kind of been a hurdle for you?
I don't think anything should ever be a secret in a patient organization. This is not a competitive space. You're not trying to compete with other people. For me, it's about access to treatment in a timely manner. Why am I 47? Oh my God, I just said it out loud. Why am I 47 and I still don't have treatment for a condition that has approved treatments out there? I mean, I think the Canadian government should be ashamed that there are so many patients that don't have treatments for medications that are out there. And the other thing I think that Canada needs to do a better job at, and I don't think this is necessarily globally accurate, is there needs to be more education of physicians, associate physicians, nurse practitioners around porphyria. They get less than 20 minutes on the condition in their medical education. When they get a patient that presents himself with porphyria, they either don't know what to do or they want to treat you like a pin cushion. They're like, ooh, there's something weird with you. Let's put you on this journey. And you don't think we've been on that journey like 5 times around the sun? Of course we have. My biggest challenge in Canada is we have a couple of experts, but not enough. And there needs to be more. There needs to be more education. There needs to be more asks to come into rounds. There needs to be, more comprehensive treatment plans. There needs to be medications that are available. We're small. Well, we're not small. We're huge from a landmass perspective. We're small in terms of our population, but we're mighty. And I think that's what we just love our drug companies to know that about us.
Yeah. And do you think the education aspect for the healthcare professionals, do you think it's their unwillingness to want to learn it, or do you think it's just the advocacy is not fully there yet in terms of raising awareness?
I wish I knew. We're offering 5 scholarships to HCPs to learn more about EPP, and we will give them a grant. We are asking people to get to know more about porphyria, whether they attend a conference or a session or a symposium. We will actually pay for them to learn more about it.
And has that been a hard thing for people to say yes to? Have they been jumping on that, or is
I
it?
don't think, I just think it's so rare that
Mhm.
physicians in their entire lifetime don't see a porphyria patient. So they don't know that it exists.
Yeah, it's one of those double-edged swords because obviously if it's a rare thing that we're working with here, it's going to take a lot of time and research to really get the answers. But it's just giving those that one doctor or a couple doctors that are willing to actually jump in with both feet and be like, I'm going to figure this out. And I
In
feel
all
like it's just
fairness,
so slow.
over the last year, we've had two or three professionals really jump on that bandwagon. We had David Colantonio and Dr. Michael Scott attend our AGM last week, and they were amazing. And I'm so thankful that they jumped on because we have literally had limited support from our physicians, and it feels like we're on the precipice of being able to continue to drive that engagement.
Yeah, and I think I mean, meeting David personally, I think just getting to know him and where his heart is, I think that says a lot and it means a lot to just everything in terms of the Porphyria efforts. And I think I almost feel like he's still mad at me because I recommended the steak and it wasn't very good. But that's a conversation for another time.
Fair, fair. The venue was lovely.
It was. But I wanted to ask you, for anybody that's listening or watching that may be going through the struggle of trying to figure out if they have EPP or porphyria or anything of that matter in a rare disease sense, what would your advice be for them?
It's hard to say this because I have a community now, but I know a lot of patients still feel very alone in Canada. We don't have an extensive testing network. There are not, like, we can bear, some of us don't even have GPs that they can go and see. So, for me to say, go see your GP, ask them for this test and this, for them to be referred to a specialist, that could take months or sometimes years. And
Mm-hmm.
as you know, with certain porphyrias, the timing is everything, especially for acute porphyrias. So the best time to test is just after you've had an acute porphyria attack. Well, in Canada, our system limits how quickly you can get that done unless you turn up at a hospital and wait hours and hours and hours for a test that may be inconclusive. I literally carry tinfoil around with me so that when they draw the blood, like for a blood test, I'm like, oh, you need to wrap it in this. They're like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Put it in this. It can't go through the light. Yeah, like to get the best reaction, you need to wrap it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the most frustrating thing is I'm not a healthcare professional. I can't give patients medical advice. I try and refer them through the proper path, but they just find it so frustrating because they can't get where they need to go and the right diagnosis.
Yeah, and it's hard to throw advice at people because I mean, obviously, everything is easier said than done. You can just tell people, just go to your doctor, figure it out. But of course,
Yeah.
timing is everything in
And
this
we have
sense.
some
So,
extremely rural areas in Canada that aren't necessarily serviced very well. So if you are
mm,
struggling with porphyria, you're in a rural community, you're a low income family, these are all challenges that won't necessarily be easily overcome. So I would say they're definitely not alone. Reach out to the organization, reach out to me. Um, I'm happy to support where I can. We are leveraging like your organization, United Porphyria Foundation's organization, and all the resources that are out there uh, to make sure that we can interconnect with each other. So sorry, it's the American Porphyria Foundation. Sorry, I got them both confused there. Not
no,
great.
you're good.
But, like as I said, I'm not in competition with anyone. I'm really interested in getting patients the best treatment and the best care that they can.
So this might be a bad question, but has there been any success story with those people in those situations that are just at an end. I mean, they're in a rural area in Canada, maybe low income. I mean, what can you really tell them? I mean, it's hurdle after hurdle, but
You know what? We can only continue to advocate as much as we can advocate. I did have a young lady reach out last week who had never had porphyria. Her and her brother had porphyria. She'd never met another person with porphyria. I was the first person that she'd ever spoken to with EPP, so same as what she had. She was interested in registering in a clinical trial, and she was so appreciative. She's like, I am ready for change in my life. She actually said that. She's like, I am ready to have something done about this. I just can't take it anymore. And I found that that was so moving, that she's willing to do something for herself. She'll do anything to make her life better. And I think you need to almost, sounds horrible, but you almost need to get to that breaking point where you can break even and start moving forwards.
it's sad. I mean, it makes you sick. I mean, it's 2025, and this shouldn't be a thing. I mean, it really shouldn't.
I think what I'm most scared of is we still don't have any approved treatments in Canada. So you can go on as many clinical trials as you want, but if your clinical trial ends, you've got no recourse, no fallback, no approved medications. And it's almost like you've given candy to a baby and then you're taking it away. You don't know what type of effect that has on someone to feel normal for a summer.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden to go back to like not being able to go in the sun, not being able to experience what you've just spent the last summer experiencing, which is probably the first one of your life.
Right.
So for me, that's the biggest impact that I see patients going through. And it's tough to talk them off a ledge. It'll be okay. There'll be another treatment. There'll be another trial. But what we actually want to see is treatment.
I mean, yeah, and I know Kelly talked about this a lot too in her episode that we talked about, but in her saying that your levels had to be off the charts to even be considered for anything, and it doesn't make any sense. I don't understand the logic of that, but
on average, it takes 5 years for a medication to be picked up in Canada. You file a dossier to Health Canada, it takes them about 18 months to review it unless you get priority review. And then each province, we have 10 provinces and 3 territories. Each province then goes into negotiations for pricing. That's 5 years. I could be dead in 5 years. Like, I hope I'm not, but I mean, how long do you really have to wait for a medication to get approved?
It just doesn't make any sense. But I wanted to, before we wrapped up, I wanted to ask just if there was anything over the duration of this conversation that maybe we didn't touch on that maybe you wanted to bring up or focus a little bit more on.
No, I think, I mean, I'm surprised how quickly the time's gone, as you mentioned. I mean, this is a perseverance game.
Mm-hmm.
You're not in this for the short term, you're in for the long term. And I think we all know that because it's a rare disease genetic, like for me, it's a genetic condition. And it's never going away. Nothing is ever going to change my diagnosis, but it will be sure nice to feel a lot better about going outside.
Mm-hmm. And I know that's where I talk about advocacy. We always talk about advocacy on the podcast and how important it is. And I think that's just, I mean, to your point, that's just what it is at the end of the day. And I talked a little bit about trying to forget about having porphyria, but it's not going away. I mean, we have to deal with it. You can't just brush it aside. And if you have it and you're living with it, why not spend time creating awareness around it? And I think it feels small right now. It feels like we're making dents and we're trying to make holes, but I think it's it's just a work in progress, and that's just kind of how this life is with this rare disease,
I mean, the
unfortunately.
one message I would get out there is, how do you get loud? How do you get loud? Right? How do you yell from the top of your lungs that you're frustrated, that you want to be treated with dignity and respect, that you have more to give? Like, how do you get loud about this disease or condition? Shouldn't call it a disease.
Mm-hmm.
It's a condition.
And it's so true. And that goes down to, I mean, advocating, being loud, the power of social media these days to get in front of so many people, but getting loud in a sense that you need to stand up for yourself at the same time in those situations with doctors and Canada, beating them up a little so we can get to where we're supposed to be going. But yeah, it's just, we talk about this time and time again, but it's just, you can't be pushed over all the time. I mean, you can't just sit back, be nice, and just hope that everybody knows what you're going through. You have to voice it.
That's the one thing I would say I've learned in life is I now go into my work organization and I say, I'm a disruptor. If you don't like it, I'm not the right person to be here. Watch out, Canadian government. I'm a disruptor. I'm coming to get you.
And I can't wait. I can't wait to see this all happen. I hope it. I hope the apple falls and everything just falls into place, and you can get treatment. I mean, it seems like the most easiest thing in the world to be able to do because, I mean, in the U.S. we have better access, and I just feel like it shouldn't be rocket science. But
And
what do I
where's
know?
the equality in that? Like, why do you guys get it first? I really want it. Please.
Yeah, it's just craziness to me. But I wanted to obviously thank you and for telling your story, sharing your insight, and just I'm always interested to hear obviously the acute porphyria in general, but EPP is very interesting to me and how people cope with life, because with acutes obviously we can go outside, we can do that aspect, and it's a huge aspect of our coping mechanism. So getting a sense of how people with EPP and cutaneous porphyrias cope, I think is very interesting to me. So I appreciate you jumping on here and being vulnerable in that way.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has definitely been a unique experience. I've never done a podcast before, so I would say it's been fun. A little bit daunting, but I'm really happy to share my story and to continue to drive patient advocacy here in Canada.
And I think everybody in Canada can thank you for that. And I know it feels like maybe such a small piece to the puzzle, but I think it speaks volumes and everybody sees it. Yeah. So,
well, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to our podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with friends, family, or anyone who could benefit. And please don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on your preferred platform. It helps us spread awareness, and we would be extremely grateful. You can also follow Rarely Discussed on Instagram, YouTube, as well as TikTok. If you're someone seeking diagnosis for porphyria, visit porphyriafoundation.org to receive a free doctor packet, forms for free DNA testing, and a list of doctors in your area. Stay tuned for more episodes of Rarely Discussed.